afternoon's panel discussion, Studying Abroad as a Black Student, sponsored by Temple University Education Abroad Office. As I mentioned, we have people joining us from around the world and throughout the United States as well. I am Kenneth Monroe. I am the business manager within Temple University's Ed Abroad Office, and my passion goes far beyond study abroad in accounting and finance. Certainly an advocate for improving diversity and inclusion everywhere, in particular study abroad. And just to give you an overview of today's session, for the first few minutes or so, we're going to allow the panel to introduce themselves. And then we're going to have about 40 minutes or so of questions that I'll pose to the panel. And then at the end, we're going to open it up to you, the audience, to ask questions of the panelists. So you can do so throughout the session. Just pop it in the chat. And Evan from our office, he's actually going to pose those questions or share those questions towards the end when we get to that section of the presentation this afternoon. And before we get into the introductions, here are a few reminders. Just from a sort of a viewing experience, if you want, you can probably do speaker view for those who know how to do that, and don't ask me. But I think there's like a little icon on the top there that says view, but I'm not the most tech savvy person. But if you can find that, you can select gallery view or speaker view, depending on your preference. As far as microphones, please, we want to just keep the conversation among ourselves for right now. So if you can mute, keep your microphone on mute, that'd be greatly appreciated. As I mentioned earlier, the session is being recorded, and that recording will be made available via our social media channels, and Evan's going to provide those towards the end of the session. Lastly, as is tradition at Temple when holding sort of these type of discussions around some diversity and inclusion, there's a land acknowledgement that's read, followed by a moment of silence. So I'm going to do that right now. We acknowledge that we live and work on land that is home to the Lenni Lenape, the original stewards of what is now known as Philadelphia and the surrounding lands. We honor and pay respect to the caretakers of these lands and commit to uplift the voices of its community members. Thank you. As I mentioned, I'm Kenneth Monroe, business manager in the Study Abroad Office, and my study abroad experience includes service learning in Mexico, also as an undergrad to Australia, and a study tour abroad throughout Italy while I was in grad school. Now I am going to kick it over to our panelists. I'm going to start with Amir. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Ken. Yeah, I'm super happy to be here. My name's Amir. I use she, her pronouns. I am a current Temple sophomore. I'm a psychology major. And I am an international student. So I'm originally from Cape Town, South Africa, pretty fresh off the boat. So yeah, excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Zaraya?
Hi, I'm Zaria. I'm a senior English and Spanish double major. I studied abroad twice, so I'm really excited to share my experience.
Thanks, Zaria. Ola Yele, who goes by Ola. You go next.
Yeah, thanks, Kenneth. I'm Ola Yele. I'm from Nigeria. It's in Nigeria called Ibadan. And I'm a graduate student at Temple University. I'm obtaining my MBA. I'm going to be graduating next year. Then I'm also part of the International Student Advisory Board on campus. So I'm excited to be here and I'm honored to be part of one of these panels here.
Yeah, great to have you, Ola. Olivia?
Hi, everyone. My name is Olivia Newsom. I'm a junior international business major, and last year I studied abroad at our campus in Japan. And now I'm a peer advisor, and I'm so excited to continue talking about my international studies.
Awesome. And that's what we're going to do today. Definitely talk about those experiences. Jen?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hall. You can call me Jen. I am a senior psychology major, and I studied abroad at Temple University, Rome back in spring 2020. And I'm super excited to be here and to share the space with panelists and everybody.
And Jen's being very modest. She went through probably one of the most difficult semesters abroad. Anybody remember last year, spring 2020? We had to bring all the students back and sort of cut their program short. So I'm definitely interested in hearing that perspective as well. David Ford, one of our Temple alums. Go ahead, David.
How you doing, everyone? My name is David Ford. I graduated from Temple in 2018 as a history major. I went to Jamaica in 2017 and then returned in 2018 as a teaching assistant. Now I am currently a music teacher in Southwest Philadelphia, and I'm so honored to be here.
Thanks for joining us, David. Appreciate it. Jada.
Hi everyone, I'm Jada. I'm a junior psychology major, criminal justice minor, and I studied at the University of East Anglia in fall 2019 in Norwich, UK.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you everyone for the wonderful introductions. As you all can see, we have folks sort of representing or been to 5 continents. If you want to throw myself in there, we can make it 6. Shout out to Australia. Folks representing, again, a lot of different backgrounds. We have students who have primarily studied abroad, going from the U.S. abroad, and also we have 2 international students who have come to the U.S. So different perspectives, unlike you've probably seen in other panels, which I think is very unique, and certainly want to tap into that this afternoon. So without further ado, let's just get into the questions. So here we are in Black History Month, sort of where folks celebrate it in different ways, sort of reflect in different ways, and it just means different things to different people. So I'm curious from the panelists, sort of what does Black History Month mean to you, and also in the context of study abroad, if you want to tie that in as well. Jen, if you want to start.
Yeah, so I think for me, so many people have experienced so much loss throughout 2020, whether it was, losing somebody or losing the opportunity of completing something, or just things didn't turn out the way that most people thought it would. And I think that looking at all the experiences that happened through 2020 up until this point, Black History Month, to me, it means being able to reflect on so many of the accomplishments that Black people, including myself, have done over this past year, the past years, and just leading up to what it is now. And I think for me personally, it's been so much, a lot of things have happened. It's been a lot of negativity. And I think throughout all of speaking up on so many things that are happening, we kind of tend to lose out on what's happening, more so positively, and what's going on, in terms of what we're doing in our personal lives. I'm about to be graduating soon, and I really want to start focusing more on that and my accomplishments and what I've been doing. And so many other Black students and Black people throughout the globe have been doing so many positive things. So I think it's really good that we start to look at what we've accomplished and really uplift those accomplishments. So that's what Black History Month means to me.
Awesome. Zaria?
Yeah, for me, Black History Month has always been a big point of pride. My family used it as a time to really educate us on things that aren't traditionally taught in social settings, academic settings. So it's a point of reflection, but also just learning. I find myself learning facts about people in different points of time who are Black that I literally would have never known if I was in history class or a sociology class. So it's really informative and just prideful to see all the things and points in history that I wouldn't have known that could be attributed to Black people.
Awesome. David, I see you shaking your head there, nodding your head. You have to add.
Yeah, so for me, Black History Month means a time to celebrate Black history and achievements that the culture has had. A lot of time when you talk about Black history, and especially like in any type of school curriculum, you tend to talk about slavery or Jim Crow, Black codes, things that kind of reflect negatively on, life, right? But Black History Month, one of the things I emphasize for my students is talking about the good things that have happened in the culture. What are the powerful achievements and the hurdles that we've kind of crossed, and looking at it in a different light. Instead of saying, oh, slavery didn't happen, but yes, slavery happened. Look what we were able to accomplish in spite of. And it's a lot of things that probably weren't known to a lot of us beforehand. So when I went to Jamaica, I saw more of a glimpse of that, because in America I didn't really understand it as much. So yeah, that's what it means for me.
Hmm. No, that's interesting. Actually, you bring up something that's interesting. I'm curious about sort of how Black History Month is celebrated internationally. For those of you who study abroad in the spring, being abroad, during the month of February, how were you able to do that? But I'm curious, Ola, if you can chime in, or Amir, and Amir actually, sort of thinking about study abroad from your home country, in Nigeria and South Africa, respectively. Ola, if you can go first, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you, Kenneth. I guess when it comes to Black History Month, we did not celebrate all this particular month in Nigeria, since I guess most of us are Blacks, and we're not used to this kind of thing. But it's an interesting experience that I'm experiencing for the first time. But what I remembered, or what I can say about it, is similar to what David just said. That it's a celebration of how far the Black community has come from then till right now, where we are right now. And it's a celebration of leadership, a celebration of determination. And I think one of the things that that encouraged me to study abroad is anyway, there are two things anyway. One is opportunity and the other is insight. And by opportunity, I mean studying abroad makes you aware of things that you've not been already aware of before, things that you didn't even think about. It just, it brings you into contact with a lot of people, and you get a lot of insights on various things. And by insights, I mean a 360 degree of a particular situation or a particular view. For instance, the way you're looking at something is most likely different from the way someone else is looking at the same thing. And it does not necessarily mean that one person is wrong. It just means that, coming from different countries like China, India, Europe, and things like that, a continent like Europe, just means that you all have different worldview, and it's good to to see these things from different perspectives. And while you yourself, you decide on the path, the best path for you in order to accomplish your goal. So opportunity and insight does it for me.
That's great. And I like, use one of my favorite words, sort of perspective. Certainly, depending on where you're coming from. And it's interesting to hear, you're coming from Nigeria. So it's like, we don't have a Black History Month because this is who we are. This is every day for us. So it's interesting. So Mary, you want to comment on that? South Africa, a little different as far as sort of population and diversity.
Yeah, a little different for sure, but also don't celebrate Black History Month. Definitely,
right.
Mainly Black there too. So yeah, I didn't really celebrate it until coming to the US, but I definitely wanted to hop on what Jen said about really what Black History Month has become for me, especially in 2021, coming from not celebrating it to 2018 or 2019 was the first time I was celebrating it in the US. But it has kind of shifted meaning for me each year as I've grown to understand more about American culture and the oppression of Black people globally in different settings and with different perspectives behind them. But for 2021 specifically, it's really been about Black joy and Black resilience for me. So finding the spaces where one can not only uplift and celebrate, but also find where resilience has persisted throughout decades, throughout years, and where we're finding that with each other right now, in such a space where like there's so little connection, human to human, person to person, like hand to hand, touching somebody. To find Black joy in that space and to hold on to that, that is political statement in itself. And so I really have been trying to embody that this month. And it's been an interesting month coming off of last summer, and the way that people have chosen to kind of approach this month after last year. And what Jen was saying, with all of the loss that's gone on in the last year and a half, we really just need, there's so little space for positivity, for happiness, for laughter, for joy. So any chance to take that and to also stand in my Blackness within that, I'm taking right now. So that's what it's meaning for me.
Awesome, absolutely. Jada?
So Black History Month and we've had like a weird relationship, because as a child, my dad always made it very important to learn Black history. Every Black History Month, he tried to instill Black history into our lives. And I kind of fought him as a child, because I'm like, that's why we have school. But then I realized we don't learn any of that in school. And it's really weird, since Black history is American history, and at least where I went to school, the amount of times we did American history, to not really acknowledge Black people except for slavery and civil rights was weird. So I went to a predominantly white school, and so they would acknowledge it the first day. They would have a Black kid on the announcements go, "It's Black History Month," and that was it. And so in England, Black History Month is actually in October, so I got to experience it there as well. And it was really interesting, because I've always experienced it kind of as like this thing that doesn't get acknowledged, but it was very public there. They made sure you were aware of events. This is kind of a small thing, but they even put it on like the cups. The cups in the cafe, they would change to fit different months, like Disability Awareness Month. So they had one for Black History Month. So it's just very interesting to see how like it seemed like people finally cared about it the way I felt like people care about it, and the way I care about it.
That's great. Thanks for that perspective. Olivia?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Jada was saying. Personally, growing up in a predominantly white community, which was what my high school was, the Black History Month wasn't necessarily, it was kind of performative, I would say. It was to kind of show that they were acknowledging Black History Month, but not really moving past actually sharing these stories and like going past the basics of what we all touched on. But when I studied abroad in Japan, kind of immersing myself in this homogeneous culture, and I felt more aware of being Black outside of the normal context of being in America, and not seeing Black people for weeks on end in Japan was so interesting to kind of discover who I was as a Black person outside of that community in America where I was so comfortable with. And so Black history wasn't necessarily celebrated in Japan, I guess for lack of representation. But what I did notice was over the summer, after Black Lives Matter kind of exploded after the murder of George Floyd, there were so many protests and activism movements within Japan as a whole that really highlighted and celebrated the minority of Blacks living in Japan, which I thought was really interesting to see the reach that this online movement was able to span across. I thought that was really interesting.
No, that's phenomenal. We were, at least I was surprised to see how far-reaching the BLM sort of became or went, if you will, across the world. Seeing protests in various countries. Let's talk a little bit as far as expectations and actual experiences. Anytime we're going somewhere foreign, different, there's a set of expectations hopes, desires, fears, things along those lines. And then there's the actual reality, right? Once you're actually in the country and you're interacting with people, whether it's your peers or the community, there's the reality. So I want to talk a little bit about your expectations and how they sort of aligned or contradicted or sort of met your sort of the experiences. I'd be curious. Let's start with Amir. You coming to the U.S. I think you've been here a few times prior, but coming to Temple, what were your expectations in the actual experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually born and raised in Cape Town, South Africa, but to parents and an entire family of Americans. So I chose Philly and chose Temple and was like, oh, I know everything that I'm getting into. What do you mean? I had never been to Philly before coming to Temple, but I had been to the East Coast and I have family in Texas and Michigan and Georgia. So I'm pretty familiar with the US from a holiday basis. So coming, I was like, oh, I got it. I'm good. Like, I'm not going to have much surprises going on here. You know, everything's a little new because I've never been to Philly, but the culture shock isn't going to be huge in the way that they talk about. I have a couple friends who moved to the UK from South Africa and to one or two to the US, but all of them kind of were only native South Africans. And so not coming from that experience, I was like, okay, I'll be fine. Got here, didn't realize how South African I was until every second word was everybody being like, oh, your accent's so cute. And so, yeah, it definitely it was almost nice to have a newfound sense of pride in something that, you didn't even have to consider before, when everyone around you looks like what you grew up with, to shift that completely. All of a sudden you have this new identity which you didn't have to proclaim before, and now you're introducing yourself and it's coming right along out of your mouth with it when you meet anybody new. And so that was interesting to be kind of explaining my Africanness, explaining my internationalness for the first time with students, because every time I had come to the US before, it was with my grandparents or with my parents, and just generally older than my age group. So yeah, so it was a really interesting kind of dichotomy that happened there. And then I also just didn't realize the perception that others would have on my Blackness or lack thereof. So in South Africa, as Ola was saying, in Nigeria too, I mean, most people are Black, and also I have albinism, and most people are used to seeing people who have albinism. So I looked at in South Africa as, okay, that's a person who's Black who has albinism. Here, I look like a white person to people who are less used to seeing that unique mix of things. So not only was I kind of re-understanding what it meant to be African and South African and also American in this new context, but also trying to understand what it meant to have these identities and have them kind of turned on their head in the way that I was walking down the street and knowing or expecting what people were going to think looking at me. So it was a really interesting switch that I hadn't expected or thought that I would have as an experience at all. But I think it really helped grow me into really lots of confidence in the identities that I hold close to me, and being able to not only talk about them in new ways, but advocate for them across a global context. So it's really an interesting experience to be having.
No, for sure. I appreciate that. So many different perspectives and sort of, you talked about identity, which we're going to get into that shortly. Zariah, I'm actually interested in hearing your sort of answer to this. I know you studied abroad twice at Temple, once in Ecuador and also Spain. So you had a second opportunity to go abroad. So curious to know how, sort of you prepared yourself from, an expectation standpoint and then the reality. And then when you went abroad the second time, did you change the way in which you approach sort of that trip, that experience going to Spain?
Yeah, I would say in general, I have a really large appreciation of travel. But as a Black woman, there's a lot of, for me, prep work that goes into that. I find myself researching, well, what is my treatment going to be like as a woman? And then I add on the second Google search of, well, how do they treat Black people in this country? In Ecuador, well, I guess I would say my expectations was I was expected to be treated like an outsider. I really understand that in a lot of countries, being American isn't a good thing. It's kind of like a big label on your head, and they can smell that you're from the United States from a mile away. In Ecuador, I was really surprised to see the diversity of the people there. And I often was treated as if I was from Ecuador because there's a lot of people who look like me. And I did not expect that at all. And I also speak Spanish, so it was a little bit easier to like assimilate into the culture, like easier than I thought it would be. When I went to Spain, I was very prepared to be the only Black person in a lot of spaces. Again, I was surprised because the city that I was living in, Alicante, it's in the south of Spain. So there's a lot of African immigrants in the city. So once again, I mean, there was often times I was the only Black person around, but I was really surprised to be out at restaurants or at the beach and feel community from other people who are immigrants or studying in that country or just foreign to European culture in general. And I think my Google searches didn't prepare me for the people who live there and account there that aren't represented in what the internet or outside experience would tell me.
Awesome, awesome. Now I like how you talked about preparation. I'm gonna peg Jen here for a second because we've had prior conversations as far as just preparing. And she went to Rome, and you can get practical as far as things you were looking for, things you had to pack in your suitcase that you knew not to expect in Italy or what have you. But I'm going to give you the floor. Talk about if you could speak to preparation from any angle you like.
Yeah, getting to what like Zaria was talking about, just like, Google searching, just like other people's experiences of like, okay, how are they going to treat me, as a woman, but also like, how are they treating Black people in a certain country? I too was also doing those Google searches. And like, after a while, like once I got to Rome, like it kind of really, it's really just one of those things where it's like, you don't really know until you truly just like throw yourself into the mix and kind of just like go for it. So to say like Google may be like a good idea, but sometimes it's just like it won't really give you like the full blown experiences. What I did find were a lot of like, like sort of like the negative experiences of living like in a European country. So it kind of like prepared me to be like, okay, like this might happen to me and I'm gonna have to like figure out how I'm gonna deal with it. And so I had to think about like, preparing for that. And even like, prior to like going to Rome, like even like during like pre-departure orientation, like, I went into like the room and like I was like looking to my left, looking to my right, and like most of the students were like predominantly white. So I kind of was already like preparing myself like from the beginning already, like knowing that, okay, like I'm going to a predominantly white school. This is going to be a predominantly white community. So I'm already like setting myself up to just understand like, listen, Jen, if you don't know yourself now, you're going to be learning about yourself today. And this experience definitely taught me so much about, spending time with myself and just preparing to like learn so much that you didn't necessarily know back at home, just how you would navigate like a new space. I think that that's one of like the key takeaways that you can get from studying abroad is just learning how you will navigate in different situations that you may never have thought you would ever encounter before. And just as simple as like, people in like Rome like tend to like stare more than people like in the United States. I was not prepared for that. And a lot of people were telling me about it, but then once I got there, I really understood. They really were staring at me. And it wasn't like always out of like, like a necessarily like a negative way, but sometimes it would be like out of curiosity too, because like maybe they don't see like someone my complexion or some people with my hair. Granted, my hair wasn't this big before, but like, it was like kind of like shorter. But just thinking about that, like it was just a lot to prepare myself. And it's like a lot when you have to think about all of these things. And then also on top of that, knowing that you're there to study, because it's a part of the name, studying abroad, but you're going to be a student and then having to navigate through all of these things. So I had to prepare myself for that. And and keep also talking about like, you know, preparing myself. I also like had to bring my own hair products there. And like I said before, like I had big chops like back in August of 2019. And so I was kind of like in the process of growing my hair out. So it was a little bit shorter anyway. But you know, just preparing for that, like I kind of just like knew, I didn't like know, I didn't really do any research in terms of like finding like hair stores in Rome, but I just ended up like packing like a bunch of conditioner, a bunch of shampoo, just all of my hair products. Cause I was just like, I'm not even gonna fool with this. So I'm gonna just have my own stuff and prepare for this semester. Granted, I wasn't there for the whole time, so I didn't really have to use up everything, but it was just good for me to just have all of my stuff and know that I didn't have to like, you know, try and figure out, oh, where am I going to find these things? So that was like one thing that helped like prepare me, is just like already like having this type of stuff. But it's also like good to know that like, you know, some Black women like already like have like a protective style prior to going to studying abroad. So like, you know, getting your hair braided or like twisted up is kind of like a good way to like not have to really think about your hair for a while, like even while you're like studying abroad somewhere. So in terms of preparing, get your hair braided.
Amir, did you want to say something?
Yeah, could I just hop in on that? Yeah, so I totally agree. And I think those items too can just be comfort items for you. Like I didn't do that when moving from Cape Town to the US. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna be totally fine. You know, the land of the free, the home of the brave, all those things. It's got, you know, grocery aisles full of things. I'll be fine. And I didn't realize the relief that came with literally 4 months ago finding finally the hair products on Amazon of all places that I used to use in Cape Town. And the first time those things like arrived in my hand and actually feeling and like smelling all of it's just like it becomes a comfort thing for you, and that can like combat the culture shock, the like being away from home, all of it. And really, I didn't realize how much it would have affected me until I was like in the shower the next morning. I'm like, oh my God, it smells like home. So yes, I totally agree with Jen. I think, you know, those kind of things, whether even if it's not hair products, you know, whatever it is, it's going to like bring a little bit of that sense of culture and home to you with you. That's something to think about when preparing. And there's no shame in that, like pulling up with 6 bottles of conditioner and someone's like, they have stores in Rome, and it doesn't matter. I want it for me. It's going to make me feel good and my hair is going to look good either way. So yeah, definitely totally agree.
Awesome. Now, I appreciate that perspective. I want to shift a little bit to talk about identity. This is always sort of an intriguing discussion when we talk about studying abroad. We all sort of have our aspects or consider about aspects of our identity. What makes us who we are in our home environment, or sort of where we are normally, and how is that challenged when you're going abroad, right? And you're in a different sort of political context, social context, economic context, whatever, racial context, whatever the case may be. I'm curious to know how your identity, and however you identify, sort of differed or was challenged when you went abroad. David, I want to start with you, your sort of experience in Jamaica twice, actually.
Yeah, so when I first went to Jamaica, I had no expectations. I'm the youngest of 4. All of my older brothers, they all went away. So I just wanted to go somewhere. So I didn't really do any research. I didn't really care. I said, I want to go. This seems like a program for me. I want to go. And so when I got to Jamaica, I really started to question why I operated the way I operated back at home. I had one example is one of the friends, the male students that was there. We were at somewhere and he was dancing, and yeah, I'm dancing, he's dancing. Well, I wasn't really dancing because I'm not much of a dancer, but he was dancing, he was getting it in. And one of the guys, you know, from the area, he darted. He must have been about a good mile up. He darted from where he was. He came up to me and he says, "Is this your friend?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "He's dancing like a girl. Tell him to stop." And I started instead of getting mad that he said that, I thought, would I have had that reaction if we were back at home, if we were in Philly, if we were hanging out? Would I question how people just operate as their being, or would I just be like, I don't really care? And so I really started questioning myself. I was I was watching a video about Jamaica, and they said, and someone said, highlighted how they are the most resourceful people with the less resources. And I thought, again, I thought back at myself, like, what are the things that I'm like kind of engulfed in back at home, and what are the things that I think I need back at home that I really didn't really need to be happy. You know, a lot of people talk about how, oh, it's the communities in Jamaica are so poor and they're just so run down. And I can't believe one of my friends said, I don't know how you made it in Jamaica. Like, I would never be able to take a shower outside. I would never be able to do this. It's so poor. But I'm like, yo, they are so happy. Like, they are so just chilling. They are so free. They are so peaceful. Why do you care so much about what someone else is doing? As long as they're happy and they're not really hurting anyone, why do you care so much? And so I tell you, when I got back home, I used to before Jamaica, I needed the latest Jordans, I needed a polo t-shirt, I needed some type of name brand. When I got back home, all that stuff went out. I didn't care about any of it because I started realizing myself as, you know, a black person or as a person, period. What are the things that you really need to survive? Can you take any of these things to your grave? Can you do what? How are you helping somebody with these things? And when I started challenging that, I started understanding myself more. Where more before I was a materialistic, you know, this is my identity, this is my idea of a man or a black person, or this is my identity. This is how I understand how to be a person, period. And then when I got to Jamaica, it was like, yo, just chill, take a step back and be free and just kind of let things happen. And so it definitely reshaped my identity, or I wouldn't say reshape my identity. It helped me realize who I really was, and for, you know, forsaking the stuff that I thought I was.
Mm-hmm. I like how you sort of phrase that sort of a reshaping of your identity or just your thought process. Very interesting. Jade, I'm going to come to you shortly, but Ola, I'm curious for you. You mentioned coming to Philly, coming to Temple was your first time outside of Nigeria. Coming from a predominantly black country, first time out of Nigeria, coming to the U.S. as a black African male, and however else you identify, and you can share what you like. Sort of how was your identity challenged or reinforced, or what sort of insight and perspective did you gain about your identity coming to the United States?
Yeah, thank you, Ken. I think in Nigeria, and I don't know if it happens elsewhere also, but your identity is kind of like molded, you know, from when you were young, like based on the culture you are from in Nigeria, or the tribe you are from, because there are more than 100 tribes in Nigeria. Based on the tribe you are from, the family you are from, how big your family is, and even the country as a whole, it's kind of influences your identity in one sense. Your identity is like an aggregate of all these factors in Nigeria. And that's how it's born. There are expectations of you, expectations from your family, from your culture, from your tribe, man, from Nigerians, like from people that you don't even know before, just because of the fact that you're in Nigeria. And so that's what you know, you that's what is experienced worldwide. You know, when it comes to being in Nigeria. Like for example, being in the US right now, I've met with a few Nigerians, and when they see me, or you know, we see each other, then you know, it's immediate, like, what's up, how you doing, where were you staying, and things like that. You know, start talking about similarities and differences, you know, in Nigeria, and you know, and what we are doing, you know, in this country. And so there's that core value. There are some core values and some core factors that are in you already, that it's hard for these things to be eroded away, you know. But no matter where you are, no matter where you go, and no matter the experiences you have in those places, it always impacts your identity in one way or the other. It does not mean it will change your core value, or it does not mean it will change who you are, but there's always a little impact that you feel from, you know, experiencing new things. And I think one of the things that I've come to experience or come to understand here is that I've come to learn some things about myself that I didn't know before. Some things I would enjoy that I didn't know before. For example, when I was in Nigeria and I was an undergraduate, I used to focus a lot on books, like I want to get the first class, I want to do this thing. So I wasn't too much interested in going out too much like that, and or don't let me say I wasn't more interested, or I would say I didn't go out to parties and to things like that. I didn't go out a lot. And coming here, I discovered that wow. Based on encouragement from other students and other people that already know, they'll be like, Yeli, they call me Yeli. I mean, some people call me Hola too. Like, Yeli, come on, let's go out, let's go and do this, let's go and do that. I'll be like, do I really want to do it? But then I'll go out, go and through, go to the bowling thing and play bowling and do some other kind of stuff. And I'll be like, I really enjoyed it. And then I'll be the one calling them next that when are we going next? When are we going next? And even though I have books to study. So it just made me discover that there are some things about myself that I didn't know I actually liked, and these experiences have like brought it out to the surface, and I'm actually doing this kind of thing. So thank you.
No, so you turned into a party animal. Is that what I'm hearing? No, that's just a little bit. No, awesome. No, I brought that question. I thought that was a very interesting question because I've heard so many sort of stories of speaking of like Black males from my perspective, how we're viewed here in the United States versus in other countries and other cultures, and how you sort of navigate how you're received in that perspective. So I threw that out there for the panelists, and I want to give Jada an opportunity to respond to that before we move on to another question.
So growing up, since I was pretty much always during my childhood and teenage years in like predominantly white schools around mostly white people. So I was very used to the label of Black. Like I felt like I walked into a room to what people immediately saw. So I was used to carrying that. And so when I went abroad, because I also looked up the area, and the town I went to is 99% white. And so I was like, okay, I'm not, like, this makes me kind of unsure. I didn't know how, like, the population was at the actual school, but I was like, I don't know how I feel about carrying this label. And also I was like, okay, but now I'm also an American. And I don't remember who previously said it, but Americans aren't looked at the best light. So I was like, I'm kind of worried about this. But actually going there, even though so in the accommodation I lived in, I was the only non-white person. In a lot of my classes, there were like in 100 kids, there were maybe like 5, maybe a few more Black people. But UEA, first of all, has a big international community. So there are a lot of people from a lot of different countries, and I never felt like the label of being Black was forced on me. No one ever did anything that made it like super aware that I was Black or American, to be honest, either, where people would ask me about it, but no one treated me differently for it. So it was actually really interesting because for me, with my identity before I went abroad, I thought I was Black first because I wasn't always treated like an American in America. So it felt weird to attach that label to me. But then being in the UK and how previously, I know Amir mentioned this and Jen had mentioned this as well, about how like something from home where the American accent became so comfortable to me, regardless of who it was, just because it was something familiar. So I feel like it did make me feel like more attached to American culture in another country than I actually had in America, even though that's where I had been for the majority of my life. So it was a really interesting experience.
No, that is very interesting as far as what part of your or aspect of your identity sort of takes the forefront, right? Like sort of in America, you could be Black first and then everything else comes afterwards. And then as you travel abroad, maybe your American identity, right, starts to take sort of precedent and it leads, right? And then the color sort of comes after that, if you will, or anything else, however else you identify comes afterwards. Interesting. We're approaching towards the end of this discussion. This segment of the discussion, but I want to sort of shift a little bit. And Olivia, if you could take this up first, as far as Just generally speaking, why is it important to study abroad? And if you can specifically, why is it important for a Black student to study abroad?
Yeah, so the importance of international travel for me kind of started pretty early on. My mother encouraged all three of her children to do some sort of international travel in high school. So I was able to get a little bit of experience then, and even before I studied abroad for the first time or traveled abroad, I saw my sister go abroad to Thailand when I was maybe in elementary school, and seeing my great grandmother's reaction to my sister traveling across the world to Thailand, my great grandmother who was 90 years old at the time, to kind of see in real time um, how proud she was of her family, of her offspring, to have these opportunities that she could only dream of when she was growing up. So I think the importance of international travel, of studying abroad, for me is just to just because I can and because I'm able to, and I'm so grateful to have that opportunity, to have that option, because I know that for a while, like in America, going from state to state was difficult and was considered dangerous. So I am just really excited to prove to my ancestors and to prove to my family members that how far we have come, and to kind of push the envelope for people to come after me.
Sure. Thanks, Olivia. Zariah, again, you went abroad twice, so talk about why it's important, and also if you want to add in sort of how it help you sort of in your future for your future goals or things you're thinking about doing down the line.
Yeah. So I come from a family of immigrants. So like my lineage in the U.S. isn't that long. And I think for that idea, my mom really emphasized seeing more than what the United States has to offer. So I've been traveling since I was a kid. And I picked up speaking Spanish through school, but I realized that it just opened up a whole nother world of opportunities just to experience and understand life from more than a tourist perspective, I would say, because I'm able to integrate into the culture a little bit easier because I can have more tabletop conversations. Like both times I studied abroad, I lived with a family, and neither of my families knew a lick of English. Like we would say hello just as a joke, and that was the end of the English. So it was really being able to do that for extended periods of time is just refreshing because I feel different when I'm living somewhere else rather than I flew here, I'm here for a week, I'm seeing the safe destinations, and then I'm going home. It was, I have a route that I walk to go to school, I have a route that I walk to go run errands. I felt really a part of the culture, and it's nice to be able to add that to a list of, well, I lived in Philly and I lived here, and I can also say I've lived in Spain. And it's just, I think it adds a lot to who you are as a person, but also gives you, when you come back to the US, you have more to add to the conversation. You have another way of thinking that maybe someone who hadn't had the opportunity to study abroad or speak another language or experience another culture maybe change their mindset or challenge them to think differently about what we're just accustomed to seeing and living.
Cool. David, I'm just curious, sort of your students, have you shared with them your study abroad experience? And what has been their sort of reception of that?
I've shared it with everyone who has ears. um, Jamaica was one of the greatest things that has ever happened to me, and I likewise agree that being able to go to a community where you're not just on the resort area or the safe destinations or the tourist destinations. Um, I was in Yala, St. Thomas, Jamaica, which is about an hour south of Kingston, and it's very, very different from Philadelphia. And I was born and raised in Philly. So getting that experience, like Zaria said, you get a different perspective. And with my students, a lot of times I'm kind of correcting their unintentional ignorance when it comes to language or different cultures and even how they joke around. And I understand because I was one of them when I was in third and fourth and fifth grade. So I'm like, hey guys, this is why that's not acceptable. But without that experience and being exposed to a different culture and language and everything, I wouldn't have been able to add as much to those types of conversations. And it's funny, I'm not Jamaican in any way, but all of my students say I'm Jamaican because I talk about Jamaica that much.
No, that's great. That is great. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna sort of shift a little bit because this question posed, and I hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right, Sabria. Um, Sort of really appreciated Jada's response to sort of, I guess, being American and then being Black while abroad. And I'm not sure if some others on the panel want to kind of speak to that about how sort of your Americanism or your American identity leads first as opposed to Black and what that meant to you and how did you receive that initially? I'm curious. Jen, if you want to, oh, David, you have a response to that?
Oh, yes, I'll make it quick.
I didn't know you put your hand up. So I didn't know. And Jen, we'll come to you with Jen right afterwards. Go ahead, David.
Okay, so I had an interesting experience one time when I was in Jamaica. I was standing. I don't know why I was by myself, but I was standing by myself, and somebody from the area came to me and it was asking me for directions, and I'm like, dude, I'm not from here. And he says, oh, I thought you were one of us. And then he like walked away. So I thought it was interesting that I was this American. And a lot of times when they saw the American group, if we wanted to go to like the waterfall, whatever, they spike them prices up because the assumption is Americans can pay it. You're gonna spike the prices up because they can pay it. Um, so what we would do in my group, funny, is very funny when you think about it. They would tell me to go in, we'll get the Jamaican price, but they told me don't talk. They would say don't open your mouth at all because as soon as you talk, all that Jamaica goes out the window. um, so I had this really interesting experience where I was Black enough to be Jamaican, but I was also not Black enough to be Jamaican. When I first experienced it, I thought it was so honoring. I said, yes, I look like one of them because sometimes I felt like I wasn't Black enough in America. So I'm like, all right, yes, I'm one of them. And then once they realized I wasn't Jamaican, I said, man, now I still have to deal with something. And I felt like I'm finally in a country or amongst a lot of Black people because I wanted to go to an HBCU. So I'm finally around it by a sea of Black people and I'm good. And then as soon as I talk, it all goes out the window. And I felt, man, I'm back into this not acceptance feeling. And at first it felt bad, but then, you know, the Jamaicans are great people. So after a while, when you start talking to them, the guard goes down a little bit. They're like, all right, he's American, but we don't have to jack his prices up. So
Very interesting. Jen?
Yeah, so I can think of a couple of ways. I think like for me, like when I was in Italy, prior to going, like I had like no knowledge or I guess like I didn't really have like much equipped what am I trying to say? Like I guess like in terms of like the language of speaking Italian, like that was just not it was not it. So I just didn't I wasn't really able to communicate in Italian super well. So I did take Italian 1001 while I was in Italy. But with that being said, there it was definitely like a language barrier at times when it would have been super duper helpful to know Italian in certain situations, particularly more so when I was like navigating, because for me, like I really love immersing myself like in a culture or like a new place by just like learning how to like get around. So in Italy, like there's like specifically with Rome, like there's like a really like pretty like a similar like metro system that's kind of like similar to like the subway in Philly. So it was like a great way for me to be like, okay, like, well, I'm here. Well, I can learn how to get to the Coliseum today. So, you know, just being able to like look at the different names and stuff like that was like a great way for me to kind of like learn about, you know, I guess like immersing myself like within like the language and just like the culture. But I think that was like one moment where I was like, okay, I'm definitely American. I'm definitely like, I don't know the language here, like what's about to happen here. So I think that would be like one way. Another way that I would say that I felt like I kind of like, you know, reflected on like the privileges that I had like while growing up. For me, like I grew up in Newark, Delaware all of my life, and I didn't really have to like deal with or navigate in terms of like citizenship or having to migrate from one country to another and just learning, you know, like a different culture in that sense. So learning from, you know, several different perspectives through the Culture and Identity Envoy program that I participated in, just learning so many like, you know, stories of people like having to migrate from like one country to another at such a young age, and then understanding like how like citizenship works and how policies affect so many people within Italy and even the United States as well. It just really makes you like rethink about like how like that plays a role in your life, and how, you know, I didn't really have to go through that. So just to see how it really impacts people. And, you know, for me, like once I came back to the United States, like looking at, you know, the news and seeing so many people get affected by it, it really like opens your eyes and it really makes you want to speak up more for people. So I think that would be like a couple ways like I like really thought about like, okay, I'm Black, but I'm also American.
Yeah, I find sort of being in a different country, whether you're studying abroad or just traveling abroad, your identity is always challenged. For example, I remember going to Australia, and I mean, I don't know if you can get any farther away from the U.S. than Australia, but you know, I land there and I'm thinking like, what am I doing? But Ola, I was like you. I wasn't a party guy, but my roommates took me to this club, and they're playing hip hop music, and everyone's like jamming, and they're looking at me, and everyone's like as if I'm like some authentic, like I'm a rapper or something. And I never felt so celebrated or appreciated ever in my life, because that was totally opposite in my experience in the United States as a Black male. But to be in Australia and just to kind of people like really come up to you and genuinely want to have a conversation, it was something different. So it was just being out of sort of what I'm accustomed to, and being appreciated in different ways. And if it's music that you know, that's great too. And I'm sure David can appreciate that. It's just different. So Amir, go ahead, please. Yeah. And Zariah, right after Amir, you can just jump right in.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that and to like kind of further answer your question of why it's so important for Black students to study abroad. I just think like I had a similar experience. The first time I was at Temple, we do something called Temple Fest, where all the student orgs come together and like traditionally sit and have their little booths out, and everyone just like walks amongst the table and there's music playing and it's a whole vibe. And it was like the first couple of days of being on campus in 2019, and like a South African song started playing and I was like, oh my God, I'm actually here. Like people know me, people know South Africa. What is this? Because I was so used to like you know, being in Dallas or being in Detroit and like having people be like, oh, where is South Africa? I don't remember where that was on the map, you know? So going from like having that experience to then like having like a Gom song playing on the radio, I'm like, oh my God, people are dancing and everyone knows the words. What's going on here? So it's so important to like tie that kind of experience, right, where your identity in another country is still celebrated. So you're choosing a place that could celebrate that identity for you, and like you can feel held in that space, but also that you can create your own holding. So like you can, you know, make your own hands for yourself. So at that same Temple Fest is where I found the dance group that I'm now on. So Temple's only African dance team I chose to become a part of, and that became a space where I could go twice a week and be only around other Africans. And so even though I'm like one of like maybe 2 South Africans in the entirety of Temple, which is like 32,000 kids. So I'm not walking down the street meeting South Africans everywhere I go. So I'm not getting that part of my identity being held often enough. And so to create that space for myself meant that like, even if I wasn't getting it in classes, I wasn't getting it in a social circle, I was getting it at least twice a week, guaranteed. You're going to go into a space where someone's going to require and expect that you are African first and talk to you as if that is the case, versus walking down the street and everyone just expects that you are what they are because you look enough like it. So that became a really important portion for me. And it also, as I was hearing everybody else's responses to why it's important, it just really made me think about why, like, sending Black folks from the US abroad is really an important thing to be doing, because it allows someone who has had a uniquely American sense of Blackness see their Blackness from a global perspective. So you are not only like kind of reimagining what it means to be Black in America, because you're now seeing it for the first time from the outside, especially if you've never traveled before, but then second, now you're seeing how everybody else sees American Black folks versus Black folks from across the world. So I'm sure Ola could speak a little bit more to that too, about how you don't really notice how much you're Black until you're in a place where there aren't that many Black people around. So coming from like Nigeria, where it's mainly Black people, to America, where it's not mainly Black people, but Philly, where it kind of is. Yeah, so it's really interesting that like those parallel spaces that can exist, but like my emphasis has always been on creating that space for myself. And even if it's like artificial in the beginning, it becomes authentic, and it just allows you to hold different parts of your identity and to create space for yourself wherever you go.
Yeah, just to say a little bit to what Amir said. I was chatting with a white individual one time like that, and I told him that I was from Nigeria, and I was like, "Wow, congratulations! Wow, we don't have to fight or to protest about racism in my country because everyone is Black and things like that." So just, and it's like I didn't look at Nigeria from that perspective, like that we didn't have to like protest, like like was that like it happened in the US last year, and I've never looked at Nigeria like that. I just thought we're just Blacks and we're just together. So it was just an interesting perspective to be able to see.
Soraya, I know you wanted to jump in at the minute.
Yeah, my question, well, my response actually ties into one of the questions in the chat about understanding how being Black is perceived by other people in other countries. I found that first, you are pretty much a spokesperson for America, but I realized studying abroad. So my second time I was in a traditional university in Spain, and I was the only, in most of my classes, the only Black person, the only person who spoke English fluently. So I was always being directed like questions like, what's America like? And can you tell us about the history? And I realized like, I didn't know, I couldn't explain American history that well. But I realized that people's perception of the US was really tunneled visions, and it was very, things are happy, is a lot of pop culture references, movies and TV shows. And I found myself explaining like the nuances of not only the different parts of the country, but oh, like that's actually not what my experiences is like based off that movie that you saw. So it was a lot of explaining, because I don't think the degree of racism is, at that time when I was studying, was particularly understood by the students. And that was a whole nother conversation I had to have on top of their questions of just what it was like to be an American in general. And even speaking to Black students abroad, their idea, and these are Black people who lived in Spain, they still didn't even understand the magnitude of the country. Like people's opinion on Trump, for instance, thought he was a great guy. They thought he was funny. And like, it was hard to have to explain everything else about him aside from maybe like the idea that was presented in the media to people when they were abroad.
All right. I'm seeing if any other questions coming from the chat.
We received one privately, and I think he had to go, but I wanted to get answered so that maybe he can watch it in the recording. It was actually for Olivia. So Douglas, who left, he said he had two brothers who actually studied abroad in Japan in the 90s. And he said that they felt burdened by being expected to be the cool hip hop Black guy. So I know that this was kind of touched on a little bit before. So that cool hip hop Black guy that was portrayed in the media, could you relate to that experience at all? Did you find that there were certain expectations that people in Japan may have had of you?
So I will say that I noticed a certain glamorization on both sides, really, from American perspective and also a Japanese perspective. I kind of saw this fantasy that each country had about one another in the way that the media or the media specifically that Japan puts out, whether it's like anime or manga or things like that, that are not necessarily reflective of, or not necessarily as accurate as what the reality of Japanese culture is. And I think that this kind of expectation that each country has about one another, it's not true. And it kind of, like the question mentioned, it kind of puts this unfair expectation on you to kind of be the spokesperson of your country and to kind of represent something that isn't true, especially regarding Black culture. And um, I I was at a thrift shop actually in Japan, and I saw a some of these pins that had like the old Black caricature during like the Jim Crow time that was really offensive. And I just think that this it's a misunderstanding really of what Black culture really is. That is it's gotten better recently, but I still think that there's a bit of disconnect there.
You know, that's phenomenal. I appreciate that. As far as the burden of representation, I think Jada mentioned, talked about going to an area where it is 99% white, and so there's so much that you have to kind of, either you're sort of affirming expectations or you're challenging expectations of the host community, because oftentimes you're going to community, maybe you are the first Black person in that space, and you're up against media images, right, historical images, just whatever perception they may have, and then you're challenging that in some way. Because, truth be told, Black people, any people, are just not sort of monolithic sort of culture. We're not all thinking the same way. We're not all doing things the same way. We all can't dance. We all can't rap. We all can't do these things. But yet there's some type of expectation. And so someone mentioned, as far as, or the question was, as far as being this hip hop person and being able to dance, being able to do all these things, maybe you can't fulfill that. Or if it's, identity, you challenge people's sort of perception of what a Black male is supposed to act like, or what a Black female is supposed to act like, or whatever the case may be. A lot of these sort of things are challenged in these spaces. We're approaching the end of our session. I'm enjoying it thus far. I really appreciate everyone being here. Perhaps as we kind of sort of wind down, if there aren't any more questions in the chat, sort of if we can kind of, I have one question I do want to ask, and I just maybe just one or two responses. But as far as studying abroad and what role does it play in social justice? We talked about the events of last year. I like to say it's events of every year. I don't think there's a time where there isn't things going on in the Black community, as we've seen in the media as of late. But sort of what role does study abroad, if any, sort of plays in social justice?
I guess I can go. So I would say for me that, studying abroad and having the experiences that I did, and just like sometimes having, feeling like lonely, like while I was there, and then coming back so quickly, and then experiencing the rest of 2020 and then up till now, it just made me realize how important it is to create awareness on and speaking up in these types of spaces and creating these spaces for others to speak up, but also to take action as well. I think it's all well and good to be able to say like, like this happened to me and this happened to me. But it's also another thing to actually be like, okay, what are we going to actually do about that? Because as much as like so many of us can like speak up on our study abroad experiences and tell you like, oh, like I experienced this, you may also experience this too. Like I also want to start like getting the ball rolling and, get people in general to also like start thinking about how, what can we do to support people? What can we do to like make changes? And I know that can take like such a long time, and that can, you might get pushback in that, but I think just again, like creating like the awareness and also like taking action and creating like spaces like these and just getting, people thinking about, like that person like had like that experience, but I want to like change this up and I want them to feel supported. I think like doing that has played such a huge role, like while, for me studying abroad, but like also like, using my voice to hopefully uplift prospective students. And, even if you're like going to be an alumni, like also like carrying these experiences to wherever you're going to go later in life.
Great. We're going to let Amir jump in and then give a brief answer. And then I just want to just end with one final question for the panelists. So you're going to jump in. Go ahead, Amir.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just wanted to definitely reaffirm what Jen was saying, that like, we can talk about our experiences of oppression across the world till we're blue in the face, but there's only so much awareness that can come without shifting and without change. And I think that was characteristic of this summer. Of this past summer, it was, we've been talking about how these experiences of being Black in America and being Black across the world have oppressed us for generations. And you've been listening, but nothing has changed. So you can hear what we're saying, but if things are not shifting as a result of that, if there's no action item at the end of that sentence, nobody's doing anything to shift and change and solve the problems we're presenting. We're just presenting problems, So I really like the idea of a solution-based approach to things and not just having that be the burden of the person going abroad. So that's not the burden of the Black person. That's the burden of everybody else around it to shift that experience for that person. And I think also, representation is so important. Even to the place of like, me, Jen, and Olivia sitting in the front desk, and Black students coming into the front desk, seeing the three of us sitting there. That shift in attitude feels so powerful. And Jen saying, yes, I went to Rome, and Olivia saying, yes, I went to Japan. And then students just saying, oh my God, I didn't even think I could leave Philly. But all of a sudden, I've got students who are sitting in front of me saying, yes, you can leave Philly, and yes, you can leave the US, and actually we'll pay you to do it. So here are all these scholarship resources. Thank you, Kenneth, for the presentation. So here are all these scholarship resources on top of that. So not only do we want you to go, and we're telling you, yes, we sat here and did it first, but on top of that, we're saying, here is money to do it, resources to go ahead, and here are solving solutions to the problems that we've presented in the past. So we did it, we came back with these issues. These issues had solutions attached. The solutions were implemented. We have panels discussing what solutions occurred and how we're talking about it and how we're fixing those things. Maybe they're not completely solved as soon as they happen, but the conversation is going on. The discussion is happening, and it's not happening behind closed doors either. It's like past the point in 2021 where racism is happening around your kitchen table, and that's kind of it. That's like 2018 stuff. You can't be doing that anymore. And so to shift attitudes towards kind of an open table where everyone is sitting at the same seat and everyone is having the same hand up and everyone's voice is not only being heard, but being listened to, and things are being done to implement the shifts that we are suggesting, that's where the change really occurs. So I think we're all on the path of doing that. And as long as we continue, we're killing it.
Somebody pass an offering plate, please. That was amazing. Thank you, Amir. I really appreciate that. Listen, as we wrap up here, if we can just go around, give me in 10 seconds, I'm gonna challenge you, in 10 seconds, just give the audience, not me, give the audience, students who are on the fence, Black students who are on the fence thinking, this is not for me, I'm not sure, I have concerns, I have questions. Give them something in 10 seconds to encourage them to study abroad. And I'm just going to call out David.
Oh, the pressure of going first. All right. Study abroad because it's a life-changing experience. It opens your minds to things that you probably wouldn't have thought of before, and it helps you grow as an individual.
All right. Jada?
I'd most definitely recommend doing it. It takes you out of your comfort zone. As a shy, introverted person, I never thought I would go to a country alone. I feel like it really helped me grow as a person and come into myself as an adult.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Ola?
Yeah, there's always a way, you know, don't let anything stop you from studying abroad or becoming who you are meant to be. There's so much good in you, and it will be selfish of you if you don't allow the world to see it. So God,
I love that. Zaria?
Absolutely study abroad. It challenges who you are as a person. It challenges your understanding of the world and your own community at home.
Yes, yes, indeed. Olivia?
Study abroad, take advantage of every and any opportunity that may come your way. Do it for people who look like us that couldn't do it. I mean, it's scary, but if we can do it, so can you.
That's right. All right, Jen?
Study abroad because I'm blanking. Hold on. Study abroad because you will have, a better cultural understanding. You will learn about yourself. You will learn about other people, and that will just create better relationships at home and even in the host country as well.
Okay. All right. Amir, bring us home.
Okay. Study abroad because you don't truly know yourself until you're looking at yourself from the outside in. And the only way you can do that is by leaving the experiences in the comfort of home. So, like Olivia said, if we can do it, so can you.
If I had a microphone, I'll just drop it on that one right there. This was no, that was awesome. I just want to thank you all. This has been so invigorating, so inspirational for me and hopefully the audience as well. And for those who are going to see this at the recording afterwards, that will be made available through our social media channels. And I think Evan's either going to pop it in there in the chat or find us on social media. We're not hard to find. Temple University Education Abroad. This has been an amazing experience. Thank you all the panelists for coming together, sharing your perspective and experience. And thank you. I want to just give a shout out to Jen. Jen Hall. She's a rock star. She is pushing us, challenging our office to really to speak more about the issues, whether racial issues, inclusion, diversity, creating spaces, safe spaces within our office and our programs. And this is what Black History means. Black History Month means to me is really looking at those pioneers and those who are sort of pushing the envelope. And we're going to look back in 2021 and say, remember Jen, she had us do our first panel, and I just wanted to say I really, really appreciate that. And for all those on our panel who have sort of had that courage to really step outside their comfort zone, as I think Jada mentioned, and others have mentioned, and really sort of see yourself outside yourself and outside your common space. Again, I really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.